The entire precinct thought they had finally cornered the city's most untouchable crime lord. They didn't realize he only let himself get arrested because my corrupt bosses just secretly put a bounty on my head. Right now, instead of confessing to his crimes, he has effortlessly snapped his handcuffs. He's leaning across the interrogation table, his thumb gently tracing my jawline, whispering exactly how he is going to dismantle the life of the detective who just dared to yell at me. Welcome back to Mimi's Romance Diary, drama lovers. If you are obsessed with that touch her in your finished energy, where a terrifying villain becomes the ultimate protector, hit that subscribe button. You are not ready for this. Let's dive in. Are you listening to me, counselor? Detective Miller slammed his hands onto the metal table, his spit flying onto my white silk blouse. Get a confession out of him or I will personally see your badge stripped. I didn't even look at Miller. My eyes were locked entirely on the man sitting across from me, Min Ki, the head of the city's most terrifying syndicate. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than my entire apartment, sitting in a sterile police interrogation room like it was his personal throne. Miller sneered, raising his voice louder. You're useless, Isabelle! Step aside! A sharp metallic snap echoed through the room. Before Miller could finish his sentence, Min Ki simply pulled his wrists apart. The heavy police-grade handcuffs shattered, clattering uselessly to the floor. The air in the room instantly vanished. Miller froze, his face draining of color, his hand trembling as he reached for his holster. Touch that weapon, Min Ki said, his voice a low, smooth vibration that sent a terrifying shiver down my spine. And they will spend the next 3 weeks pulling your teeth out of the precinct drywall. Miller didn't move. He couldn't. Min Ki didn't even glance at the detective. His dark, piercing eyes were fixed solely on me. He stood up slowly, the sheer size and presence of him suffocating the small space. He walked around the table until he was standing so close, I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. I tried to step back, but my spine hit the cold concrete wall. I am the lead prosecutor. I do not flinch. But when he raised his hand and gently brushed a stray curl away from my cheek, my breath completely hitched. He yelled at you, Min Ki whispered, his lips hovering dangerously close to my ear. I am going to buy his pension, burn his career to ashes, and make sure he spends the rest of his pathetic life washing cars. No one disrespects what is mine. I am not yours, I breathed out, trying to keep my voice steady. You are now. His thumb traced my jawline, a gentle, possessive weight. Your boss, the district attorney, just sold you out, Isabelle. You found the missing funds. There are 3 dirty cops waiting outside that door right now to escort you to a secondary location. You won't survive the car ride. The overhead lights violently flickered and died. Total darkness swallowed the room. The building's backup generator didn't kick in. He had planned this, strong arms wrapped around my waist, lifting me effortlessly against a solid chest. Sleep, counselor. His voice vibrated against my temple, right before his forearm locked securely around my neck, applying precise, painless pressure to my carotid artery. The real nightmare starts tomorrow. My head throbbed, a dull ache radiating from the base of my skull, where he had cut off my air supply. The first thing I registered wasn't a damp basement or the smell of rust, but the sterile, freezing temperature of aggressive air conditioning. I opened my eyes. Floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass wrapped around the massive room, displaying a dizzying, panoramic view of the city skyline. I was lying on a massive leather sofa. My white silk blouse was slightly wrinkled but perfectly intact, and my heels were still on my feet. I didn't panic. Panic gets you killed. I quickly assessed the room. No chains, no guards, just dead space, modern art, and absolute silence. Then I moved toward the heavy steel double doors at the far end of the loft. Locked, obviously. But the private elevator bay in the center of the room. The digital display showed a car waiting on this floor. I sprinted silently across the polished concrete, slapping the call button. The steel door slid open. A heavy, dull thud stopped me cold. He was already inside. Min Ki leaned casually against the brushed metal wall of the elevator cab, twirling a sleek silver access card between his fingers. He had removed his suit jacket. His crisp, dark shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the sharp, rigid lines of his throat. He didn't look like a man who had just infiltrated a police precinct and abducted a federal employee. He looked like he was waiting for room service. "Leaving so soon, counselor?" His voice was a soft, dangerous rumble. I stepped back, my mind racing for a weapon, a leverage point, anything. "Kidnapping a federal prosecutor is a guaranteed life sentence, Min-Ki. You know how the system works. Let me out of here." He stepped slowly out of the elevator. With every inch he advanced, the sheer physical gravity of his presence forced me to retreat until my shoulders hit the cold glass wall of the penthouse. He trapped me there, planting one hand on the glass right beside my head. The scent of bergamot and something sharply masculine wrapped around me, suffocating my logic. "The system," he murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips before rising slowly to meet my eyes, "is exactly what is trying to put you in a morgue. I am the only reason you are still breathing." I lifted my chin, refusing to let him see my pulse racing. "I don't need a crime lord's protection. I'm calling my precinct. I'm calling the DA." Min-Ki didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his personal, unlocked cell phone, and pressed it firmly into my trembling palm. His fingers lingered over mine, hot and deliberate. "Dial them." His eyes darkened with a terrifying, absolute certainty. "Let's see who answers." My fingers hovered over the glowing screen. I typed in the private, direct number of my lead investigator, David. He was the only man in the precinct I trusted with my life. The phone rang twice before the line clicked open. "David," I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. "It's Isabelle. You need to mobilize a tactical—" "Did you find her?" David's voice wasn't speaking to me. It was muffled, as if his phone was sitting face down on a desk. "No," another voice replied. My blood ran cold. Why, it was the district attorney. "But we just wired the bounty to the precinct. If she steps foot in the city, shoot her on sight. Tell the press the syndicate got her." The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the polished concrete. Min-Ki didn't gloat. He simply bent down, retrieved the device, and slipped it back into his pocket. He walked over to a heavy crystal decanter resting on a sleek marble counter, pouring 2 glasses of amber bourbon. The ice clinked softly in the deafening silence of my shattered reality. "They sold you for a promotion," Min-Ki said quietly. He walked back, stopping inches away, and extended a glass toward me. As I took it, our fingers brushed. The sudden, intense heat of his touch was the only thing anchoring me to the ground. "You devoted your entire life to a blind system, Isabelle. Now the blindfolds are off." I stared at the amber liquid, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Everything I believed in was a lie. The badge I earned, the justice I fought for. It was all worthless. I looked up at the man I had spent 3 years trying to lock in a cage. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice cracking. Min-Ki took a slow sip of his drink, his dark, commanding eyes never leaving mine. "I want you to stop running. Let me handle your enemies, counselor. Give me the word, and the men who put a price on your head won't see tomorrow." He was offering me a deal with the devil. A dangerous temptation wrapped in custom tailoring and lethal protection. I opened my mouth to answer, slowly raising the glass to my lips. A deafening crack ripped through the penthouse, and a massive spiderweb of fractured lines exploded across the reinforced glass window directly behind me. A high-caliber sniper bullet embedded itself deep into the ballistic pane, stopping exactly 3 inches from the back of my skull. Before the deafening echo of the impact could fade, a solid, unyielding weight slammed into me. Min-Ki tackled me to the floor, knocking the breath from my lungs as my crystal glass shattered against the polished concrete. Amber bourbon splashed across the expensive rug beneath us. He didn't scramble or panic. He covered my body completely with his own, shielding me with a rigid wall of muscle and bone. The neon city lights bleeding through the fractured window cast long, jagged shadows over his sharp jawline as he hovered inches above my face. I could feel the steady, terrifyingly calm rhythm of his heartbeat against my chest. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low, lethal whisper. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. He didn't even look at the screen as he hit a single button. The call connected instantly. "Rooftop, 3 buildings east, south-facing parapet," Min-ki instructed, his tone entirely devoid of emotion. Do not kill him quickly. I want a name. He dropped the phone. The sheer magnitude of his power hung heavy in the dim room. He had just ordered a man's execution while lying intimately over me, and his breathing hadn't even hitched. Slowly, he shifted his weight, his dark calculating eyes scanning my face in the shadows. His gaze dropped abruptly to my collarbone. You're bleeding. I hadn't even felt it. A tiny sliver of glass from my shattered cup must have caught my shoulder when we hit the floor. Min-ki gently hooked his fingers into the collar of my white silk blouse, slowly pushing the ruined fabric aside to expose the minor scratch. The air in the penthouse suddenly felt entirely too thin. He didn't call for a medic. He didn't move away. Instead, he pulled a pristine white linen square from his pocket and pressed it softly against my bare skin. The intense heat of his knuckles brushing my collarbone sent a violent electric shiver straight to my core. I stared up into his dark, penetrating eyes, my chest rising and falling rapidly against his. I was a lead prosecutor, a sworn officer of the law. I was supposed to be praying for a tactical team to breach those steel doors and save me. But as his thumb slowly traced the line of my neck, replacing the stinging pain with a consuming, breathless heat, a terrifying realization washed over me. I wasn't afraid of the snipers hunting me in the dark. I was terrified of how desperately I wanted to stay exactly where I was. He pulled me to my feet, the dangerous heat of his hands lingering on my waist a second longer than necessary before he finally stepped back. The fragile spell between us broke, replaced immediately by the cold reality of my situation. I was a ghost. My own government had signed my death warrant, and the man standing in front of me was the only shield I had left. The district attorney, I started, forcing my voice to remain steady as I smoothed down my ruined silk blouse. He funnels his bribery money through a decentralized offshore server. Not if I can get the master ledger, I can dismantle his entire network and get my life back. Min-ki walked over to a sleek digital display on the wall, bringing up a secure map of the city. The server requires a physical decryption key. It is currently being auctioned off tonight at the Sovereign Gala, an underground event exclusively for the most dangerous predators in the city. Then I call in a federal raid, I said instinctively. Min-ki turned around slowly. He closed the distance between us until I was forced to look directly up into his dark, calculating eyes. You are dead, Isabelle. Warrants do not apply to ghosts. If you want to survive the night, you have to stop thinking like a righteous lawyer and start thinking like a criminal. I don't know how to be a criminal, I whispered. The sheer proximity of his chest making it hard to draw a full breath. You won't have to, he replied, his voice a low, magnetic rumble. You just have to stand by my side and pretend to be entirely mine. I will handle the rest. He turned and walked toward a hidden closet embedded in the concrete wall. He pressed a panel, and the door slid open silently. Reaching inside, he pulled out a large, heavy velvet box. He set it on the glass table between us and flicked the golden latch open. I stared down into the velvet interior, my heart stalling. Resting inside was a gown made of liquid crimson silk. It had dangerously thin straps, a plunging neckline, and was entirely, scandalously backless. It was a dress designed to draw every eye in a room, and to mark the woman wearing it as the exclusive property of the man beside her. I cannot wear that, I breathed, my face burning under his heavy gaze. Min-ki reached out, his long fingers gently lifting the crimson fabric from the box. He stepped into my space, his eyes dropping to my lips. Tonight, you are playing the role of my ultimate weakness. Put it on, counselor, or we both die. The heavy steel door of the guest suite clicked shut, leaving me alone with the velvet box. I shed my ruined blouse and stepped into the liquid crimson silk. The fabric clung to my skin like a second shadow, but the back was an intricate web of impossibly thin laces that I couldn't navigate with my trembling fingers. I stepped back out into the main loft, clutching the front of the gown to my chest to keep it from falling. Min-ki was waiting by the kitchen island, staring out at the city skyline. Mad, he turned at the sound of my footsteps. His gaze swept over the vibrant red silk before settling heavily on my bare shoulders. Turn around, he instructed quietly. I hesitated, then slowly turned my back to him. The cool air of the penthouse kissed my exposed skin, immediately replaced by the radiating heat of his towering frame as he stepped right up behind me. His long fingers brushed the nape of my neck, sending a violent shiver down my spine. He didn't rush. He took the thin silk laces, his knuckles lightly dragging against my bare spine as he began to weave them together. "You are shaking, counselor," he murmured. His warm breath ghosted over my shoulder. "I am not a spy," I managed to say, my voice betraying my forced calm as he pulled the fabric tighter. If the district attorney recognizes me at this auction, he will not be looking at a dead prosecutor," Min-Ki interrupted smoothly, pulling the final lace taut. The dress tightened, molding flawlessly to my waist. "He will be looking at a distraction. Keep your eyes on me. Let me do the talking. And remember your role." His hands rested lightly on my bare hips, turning me slowly to face him. The sheer intensity in his dark eyes anchored me to the floor. He didn't just look at me, he consumed me. He reached into his pocket and produced a glittering, heavy diamond choker. Before I could ask where it came from, he stepped intimately close, wrapping the cold diamonds around my throat. The snap of the platinum clasp echoed in the quiet room like a vault sliding shut. His fingers lingered, his thumb pressing gently over my racing pulse point, the heat of his skin a stark contrast to the freezing diamonds. "Tonight, you belong to me," he whispered, his lips brushing the shell of my ear. "Do not break character, or we both die." The sovereign Gala was a masquerade of the city's worst predators, hiding behind expensive champagne and tailored velvet. As we stepped into the cavernous, gold-leafed ballroom, the heavy bass of a string quartet masked the quiet, dangerous deals happening in every corner. Min-Ki's hand rested firmly on the bare skin of my lower back, his thumb lightly stroking the silk laces of my crimson dress. Every eye in the room tracked our entrance. He exuded absolute terrifying control, and my job was to look completely mesmerized by him. It wasn't entirely an act. 10 o'clock, he murmured, his lips brushing the edge of my ear as he handed me a crystal flute of champagne. "Judge Caldwell, the decryption key is in his left breast pocket." I followed his gaze. Caldwell was surrounded by heavily armed lieutenants, laughing aggressively near an ice sculpture. "I can get it," I whispered, leaning into Min-Ki's chest so our lips were dangerously close, playing the part of a hopelessly devoted lover. "But I need you to blind his security detail." Min-Ki's eyes darkened with a flash of genuine respect. Without a word, he guided us seamlessly through the crowded floor. As we approached the judge's circle, Min-Ki deliberately stepped into the path of a towering bodyguard, causing a tense, sudden standoff that drew every eye in the group. It was a microscopic window. I stumbled perfectly, spilling a drop of champagne, and braced my empty hand against Judge Caldwell's lapel to steady myself. My fingers moved with the practiced precision of a prosecutor who had studied criminal sleight of hand for years. In a single fluid motion, I slipped the heavy metal key from his pocket and concealed it tightly in my palm. "My deepest apologies, Your Honor," I smiled, stepping back immediately. Min-Ki caught my waist, pulling me firmly against his side as the bodyguard stepped down. Hidden from view between our bodies, I slipped the metal key into his large hand. His fingers closed over mine, squeezing once in a silent, electrifying praise. The sheer heat of his approval sent my pulse racing faster than the theft itself. "Flawless," he breathed, turning us toward the exit. "We have the ledger, let's disappear." I exhaled, a profound sense of victory rushing through my veins. We had actually done it. We were going to burn the corruption to the ground. But as I turned my head toward the grand mahogany doors, the breath completely left my lungs. Standing directly in our path, blocking the only exit, was the district attorney. His eyes scanned the crowd before locking dead onto mine. The polite smile on his face slowly melted into a cold, lethal sneer of recognition. He raised his hand, gesturing to the armed men flanking him, and slowly reached into his tailored jacket. Before the district attorney could fully draw his weapon, Min-Ki moved. He didn't pull a gun. He pulled me, his arm wrapped around my waist like a vice, hauling me backward through a set of concealed velvet curtains meant for the service staff. The heavy fabric swallowed us just as an angry shout erupted from the ballroom. "Do not stop," Min-ki ordered, his grip on my hand ironclad as we sprinted down a narrow, dimly lit VIP corridor. My crimson silk dress swept over the marble floor, the diamond choker heavy against my racing pulse. We bypassed the main lobby entirely, bursting through a side security door that spilled out into the freezing night air of a private loading dock. An elongated armored Maybach was already waiting, its engine a low, menacing purr. Min-ki threw the rear door open, guiding me inside before sliding in right behind me. "Drive," he commanded the glass partition. The tires screamed against the asphalt as the heavy vehicle surged forward, instantly putting distance between us and the Gala. I collapsed back against the plush leather seat, my chest heaving as I gasped for air. The adrenaline was a tidal wave making my hands shake violently. The decryption key was still tightly clenched in my fist. I uncurled my fingers, staring at the small piece of metal that held my entire freedom. Min-ki reached across the wide seat. He didn't take the key. Instead, his large, warm hand closed over my trembling fingers, gently folding them back over the metal. "You did perfectly," he murmured, the dark intensity of his gaze cutting straight through the shadows of the moving car. The rush of the escape was intoxicating. I looked up at him, the lingering fear entirely replaced by a reckless, undeniable high. The streetlights flashing outside cast rhythmic shadows across his sharp jawline. We were inches apart. The scent of his cologne mixed with the danger of the night was completely overwhelming. I leaned in, my breath ghosting over his lips. He didn't pull away. His eyes dropped to my mouth, his thumb slowly brushing the corner of my jaw, closing the final inch between us. A brutal jolt threw us forward. The Maybach's brakes locked, the massive car violently swerving and screeching to a dead halt. Min-ki's arm instantly shot across my collarbone, pinning me safely against the seat as the tires smoked. Through the reinforced windshield, a wall of blinding red and blue strobe lights pierced the darkness. A heavily fortified police roadblock was barricading the entire bridge ahead, and dozens of armed officers were already stepping out of their cruisers, aiming directly at us. Min-ki didn't hesitate. Before the officers could fully raise their weapons, he shouted a sharp command to the driver. The Maybach's engine roared as the driver slammed the heavy vehicle into reverse. The tires screamed, spinning us violently backward before swerving into a narrow, unlit alleyway. "Out!" Min-ki ordered, kicking his door open the second the car slowed. He tossed a stack of cash to the front seat. "Wipe the drives and scatter." We abandoned the million-dollar vehicle in the shadows. I kicked off my restrictive heels, leaving them on the asphalt, and slipped barefoot through a maze of chain-link fences and flooded side streets. A freezing, sudden rain soaked my hair, but the heavy, unyielding warmth of his hand, wrapped tightly around mine, kept me moving forward. 30 minutes later, the flimsy door of a cheap roadside motel room clicked shut behind us, the deadbolt sliding into place with a hollow thud. The contrast was staggering. The cramped room smelled faintly of bleach and stale rain. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, and the only illumination came from the flickering red neon vacancy sign, buzzing outside the barred window. I was standing in the center of a faded, stained carpet, wearing a custom crimson silk gown and a diamond choker, while the city's most feared billionaire boss was methodically checking the bathroom for a secondary exit. He looked entirely out of place. The cheap floral bedspread and the peeling paint should have diminished him, yet his lethal, commanding aura only made the dingy walls feel like a high-security vault. "The police will track the car," I whispered, now shivering as the adrenaline finally began to crash, leaving me freezing and exhausted. "They will lock down the entire grid within the hour." "Let them," Min-ki replied, his voice unnervingly calm. He walked over to the window and pulled the thin curtains completely shut, plunging the room into deep, heavy shadows. "We have the decryption key. By morning, the district attorney will be the one running for his life." He turned his back to me, rolling his broad shoulders as if relieving a deep, hidden ache. He reached up, slowly pulling his tailored blazer off his arms. He tossed the expensive fabric onto the cheap bed. The breath instantly froze in my lungs. The left side of his crisp, dark shirt was completely soaked. A massive, heavy, shining stain was blooming across his ribs, making the dark fabric cling wetly to the sculpted muscle beneath. He had been hit during our frantic escape through the alley, and the stubborn, terrifying man hadn't made a single sound. My knees nearly buckled as my eyes tracked the heavy drops of crimson dripping onto the floor. "You're bleeding!" Min-Ki finally looked down at his ruined shirt, his expression dangerously indifferent. Then his dark, intense eyes locked onto mine, and the suffocating reality of our absolute isolation finally set in. He didn't ask for help. He just swayed, his lethal grace finally snapping as his knees hit the faded carpet. I dropped to the floor beside him, my hands instinctively pressing against the soaked fabric of his shirt to slow the bleeding. His skin was burning. A fierce, unnatural heat radiated through the wet cotton, warning me that the injury was far worse than just blood loss. "Get on the bed," I ordered, my voice trembling but firm. He let out a low, rough breath, leaning heavily against my shoulder as I guided him onto the cheap floral mattress. He collapsed onto his back, his dark eyes slipping shut. I tore strips of linen from a spare towel in the bathroom, pressing them hard against his ribs. The silence in the cramped room was deafening, broken only by his shallow breathing and the distant hum of the neon sign. I glanced at the small table near the door. The metal decryption key sat there, catching the red light. My way out. I could take it, slip into the rain, and disappear. The district attorney would fall, and my name would be cleared. I wouldn't have to choose between my oath to the law and the terrifying gravity of the crime lord bleeding out on the bed. But as I looked back at his sharp jawline, shadowed in the dim light, my feet refused to move. The thought of leaving him in this dingy room felt impossible. I wasn't running anymore. Hours bled away. I sat beside him on the floor, continuously pressing cool, damp washcloths to his forehead, fighting the relentless fever that threatened to consume him. Sometime before dawn, his breathing finally deepened, slowing into a steady, rhythmic calm. The dangerous heat radiating from his skin began to break. Exhausted, I let my head rest against the edge of the mattress, my eyes heavy, the adrenaline finally leaving my veins. A large hand suddenly gripped my wrist. Before I could gasp, Min-Ki pulled me up. The sudden motion dragged me over the edge of the mattress, my body tumbling softly onto his chest. His arms wrapped around me instantly, locking me in an iron grip. He wasn't fully awake, his dark eyes still closed, but his hold was fiercely possessive, tucking me securely against his side. He buried his face into the curve of my neck, his warm breath sending an involuntary shiver through my exhausted body. "I told them," he murmured, his voice a raw, heavy whisper that completely shattered my defenses. "If they ever touched you, I would burn this entire city to the ground. You belong to me." Morning light bleached the motel room in a harsh, unforgiving gray. Min-Ki was already awake, sitting on the edge of the mattress. His fever had broken, and leaving him pale but dangerously alert. He had pulled a heavy burner laptop from a concealed compartment beneath the room's floorboards, setting it on the small wooden table. Beside it sat my gold federal badge, retrieved from my discarded clothes at the penthouse. He gestured toward the screen without a word. I walked over, my crimson silk dress rustling against the faded carpet, and inserted the metal decryption key we had stolen from the Gala. Lines of code cascaded across the display before the district attorney's offshore accounts finally unlocked. The evidence was undeniable. Bribes, wire transfers, and hit contracts were all meticulously documented. It was a gold mine. "You have your life back, counselor," Min-Ki said quietly. His voice was rough, the makeshift white bandage around his ribs a stark reminder of what he had sacrificed to get me here. I let out a shaky breath, a profound sense of relief washing over me. But as I moved to copy the files, my cursor hovered over a hidden, heavily encrypted partition nested deep within the directory. It was labeled with Min-Ki's personal syndicate insignia, I shouldn't have clicked it. The folder opened, and my heart stalled completely. Hundreds of files flooded the screen: surveillance photos, audio transcripts, and meticulously detailed daily schedules. Every single document was about me. The dates stretched back over 3 years, long before I had ever started investigating his criminal empire. There were photos of me leaving the academy, transcripts of my private phone calls with my sister, and copies of my personal medical records. And he hadn't just stepped in to save my life. He had been tracking my every move. He had subtly manipulated the evidence trail over the last 6 months, deliberately leading my corrupt bosses to turn on me, forcing me into a corner where my only option was to run straight into his arms. The intoxicating warmth from his confession last night instantly turned to ice. "You engineered this," I whispered, staring blindly at the glowing screen. I stood up so fast the wooden chair clattered to the floor. "The bounty on my head, the kidnapping. You built a cage and waited for them to push me inside." Min-Ki didn't deny it. He stood up slowly, his dark eyes entirely devoid of regret. He took a calculated step toward me, that terrifying, possessive gravity rolling off him in waves. "I secured what was mine," he stated, his tone unyielding. I snatched the metal decryption key from the laptop port, grabbed my gold badge from the table, and took a stack of emergency cash from his discarded suit jacket on the bed. I backed away until my hand found the cold brass of the doorknob. "You do not own me," I breathed, my voice trembling with a chaotic mixture of heartbreak and fury. "And now that I have this evidence, I don't need you anymore." I threw the door open and stepped out into the freezing morning rain. The icy rain soaked through the oversized trench coat I had bought off a street vendor, with the cash from Min-Ki's abandoned jacket. Beneath the cheap canvas, the damp silk of the crimson dress clung uncomfortably to my skin, a lingering reminder of the man I had just walked away from. I kept my head down, clutching the metal decryption key in one pocket and my gold badge in the other, as I hurried into the subterranean parking garage of the federal courthouse. This was my territory. I knew the security blind spots, the judge's private elevator, and the exact protocol to secure a federal indictment before the district attorney even knew I was in the building. My bare feet, stinging from the cold, echoed softly against the damp concrete. Just 50 more yards to the secure elevator. "You always were the first one to the office, Isabelle." The voice echoed off the concrete pillars, freezing the blood in my veins. I spun around. Stepping out from the shadows of a parked SUV was David, my lead investigator, the man I had trusted with my life for 3 years, the same man I had heard conspiring to kill me over the phone. He wasn't alone, and 2 men in tactical gear flanked him, their hands resting menacingly on their holstered weapons. "David," I warned, forcing my voice to project the authority of a lead prosecutor, even as my pulse hammered violently against my ribs. "If you draw a weapon here, federal marshals will swarm this garage in 60 seconds. You will never make it to the street." David smiled, a cold, empty expression that made him look like a total stranger. "We aren't going to shoot you, counselor. The district attorney wants to see the look on your face when he melts that decryption key down to slag right in front of you." Before I could turn to run, a heavy cloth was shoved violently over my mouth and nose from behind. The sharp, dizzying chemical stench of a sedative flooded my lungs. I fought back fiercely, then driving my heel backward into my unseen attacker's shin. But the drug worked too fast. The massive concrete pillars of the garage began to blur and spin out of focus. My knees buckled. As rough hands grabbed my arms to haul my heavy body upward, I let the metal decryption key slip from my numb fingers, kicking it silently under the parked SUV before the darkness completely pulled me under. I was thrown onto the rigid metal floor of a dark cargo van. The cold plastic of heavy zip ties ratcheted tightly around my wrists, biting into my skin and locking my hands together. David leaned into the back of the van, his cruel sneer the last thing I saw. "The boss says hello." My head throbbed with a sickening rhythm as consciousness finally returned. The sharp metallic taste of the sedative lingered heavy on my tongue. I was forced upright, my arms pulled painfully behind a rigid metal chair, the heavy plastic zip ties biting deeper into my wrists with every breath. The oversized trench coat was gone. The freezing, damp air of the abandoned shipyard clung mercilessly to my ruined crimson silk dress. I blinked against the harsh, blinding glare of a single halogen work light. Across the rusted warehouse floor, the district attorney was pacing erratically. He didn't look like an untouchable politician anymore. He looked like prey. Resting on a dented metal barrel nearby, a stolen police scanner was crackling with chaotic, terrified audio. "They just drove an armored transport through the lobby of the 4th precinct," a dispatcher screamed through the static. "We have multiple armed syndicate units sweeping the harbor. They are tearing the checkpoints apart." David, my former partner, stood near the loading dock, his face completely drained of color. "Sir, we have to move her. Min-Ki isn't negotiating. He's executing anyone who even stands in his way. His entire network is mobilizing. We have maybe 3 minutes before they sweep this sector." I closed my eyes, a terrifying, breathless realization washing over me. The calm, calculated crime lord I had left bleeding in that motel room was gone. By walking away, I hadn't just rejected him. I had unleashed him. He wasn't looking for a strategic advantage or a quiet escape anymore. He was burning the city to the ground to find me. "We aren't going anywhere!" the district attorney snapped, pulling a heavy silver firearm from his tailored coat. He stormed across the cracked concrete, closing the distance between us in 3 frantic strides. He grabbed my jaw, his grip bruising as he forced my head up to look at him. "Where is the master ledger?" he demanded, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "Give me the decryption key, Isabelle, or I will end this right now." I stared up at the man I had once sworn my career to. The fear I should have felt was completely replaced by a strange, undeniable, absolute certainty. "You're already dead," I whispered, my voice echoing coldly in the massive room. "You just haven't stopped breathing yet." The district attorney's face twisted in pure, unhinged rage. He raised the weapon, pressing the freezing steel barrel directly against my forehead. He clicked the hammer back, the sharp metallic snap cutting through the ambient noise of the harbor. A deafening explosion shattered the night. The massive, towering steel doors at the far end of the warehouse didn't just open. They were violently blown off their reinforced hinges, crashing onto the concrete with the force of an earthquake. The deafening roar of the explosion threw the district attorney backward, the silver barrel of his gun slipping violently from my forehead. A massive cloud of concrete dust and white smoke swallowed the loading dock. I strained against the heavy plastic zip ties biting into my wrists, gasping for air as the dust began to settle. From the center of the wreckage, Min-Ki emerged. He wasn't wearing a tailored jacket anymore. His crisp, dark shirt was heavily stained from his previous injury, hanging open over makeshift white bandages. But he walked with the terrifying, absolute grace of an untouchable king. Dozens of heavily armed syndicate soldiers materialized from the shadows behind him, their laser sights instantly painting the chests of David and the district attorney. But Min-Ki simply raised a single hand. Every weapon in his ranks immediately lowered. He stepped entirely into the harsh light, completely unarmed. His dark eyes locked onto mine, carrying an intensity that made the freezing warehouse fade away. "Let her go!" Min-Ki's voice was a low, lethal vibration that echoed off the rusted steel walls. The district attorney scrambled to his feet, his hand shaking violently as he pulled David in front of him as a human shield and re-aimed his weapon at my chest. "You have nothing to bargain with. My career is ruined. If I go down, the prosecutor dies with me." Min-Ki didn't even blink. He ignored the gun entirely. The master decryption key is in my pocket," Min-Ki stated, his tone chillingly calm. "The offshore accounts, the ledgers, the political blackmail files. I will hand you the key. I will surrender my entire territory. I will walk away from the city tonight and leave the empire to you." My heart shattered violently against my ribs. He was the most feared syndicate boss in the country. He had built his reign with absolute ruthlessness, and he was offering to burn it all to the ground for a woman who had walked out on him just hours ago. "No!" I choked out, fighting desperately against the zip ties. "Min-Ki, don't!" "My empire for her life," Min-Ki interrupted smoothly, his gaze burning with a terrifying, absolute devotion. "That is my final offer." The district attorney stared at him, his face twisting into a mask of pure desperation. A hysterical broken laugh suddenly escaped the older man's lips. "You really love her," the politician sneered, his finger tightening drastically on the trigger. "Then you can watch her die." He fired. I braced for the fatal impact, but before the echo even registered, a dark shadow violently crossed my vision. Min-Ki didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. He threw his massive frame directly into the line of fire, taking the heavy bullet to his chest as he collapsed onto the cracked concrete floor. The echo of the gunshot rang in my ears like a death knell. Min-Ki's massive frame hit the cracked concrete, the impact sending a violent tremor straight through my bones. The district attorney lowered his smoking weapon, a cruel, breathless laugh escaping his lips. He thought he had won. He thought he had killed a king. Now something inside me finally shattered. It wasn't my spirit. It was my rigid, naive devotion to a law that had just tried to murder the only man who had ever truly protected me. Pure adrenaline flooded my veins. I twisted my wrists violently against the rusted metal edge of the chair. The heavy plastic zip ties strained, digging fiercely into my flesh, before finally snapping with a sharp crack. The district attorney spun around, his eyes going wide with panic as I lunged forward. I didn't hesitate. I drove my shoulder into his chest, knocking him completely off balance. The silver firearm slipped from his trembling grip, skidding across the concrete floor. I grabbed it. The heavy steel felt entirely different in my hands now. I aimed the barrel directly at his chest. David scrambled backward into the shadows, abandoning his boss entirely to save himself. "Isabelle," the district attorney choked out, raising his hands. His arrogant sneer was replaced by pure, pathetic terror. "You are a lead prosecutor. You took an oath. You cannot pull that trigger." I stared down at the man who had sold my life for a promotion. "My oath," I whispered, my voice completely devoid of mercy. "Died tonight." I lowered the barrel and fired. The bullet struck his leg. He collapsed instantly, crying out in agony as he clutched his knee. I walked over to the rusted metal barrel where David had dumped the contents of my stolen trench coat. I picked up my gold federal badge and tossed it onto the district attorney's chest. "Consider that my resignation." I turned my back on him, dropping the weapon, and fell to my knees beside Min-Ki. My hands shook violently as I reached for his face, terrified of what I would find. Before my fingers could touch his cheek, his large hand suddenly shot up, wrapping firmly around my wrist. His dark eyes fluttered open, gleaming with that same dangerous, possessive heat. "You ruined my favorite shirt," he rasped, coughing slightly as he sat up. He pulled the torn fabric aside, revealing a flattened, smoking bullet embedded deeply into the heavy ballistic trauma plate he had strapped tightly over his thick white bandages. A broken, tearful laugh escaped my lips. I threw my arms around his neck, burying my face into his shoulder as his powerful arms locked around my waist, pulling me tightly against his chest. He was alive. He rested his chin against my hair, the chaotic warehouse falling entirely silent around us. "Where to, counselor?" he murmured. I pulled back just enough to look into the dark eyes of the man who now owned my entire world. "Take me home."